Good Thursday evening, everybody. Hope you have had a good day. Hopefully, got some things accomplished that you wanted to get done. It was, at least here in mid-Oklahoma, a very lovely day today, so that was nice. Got a little time to be outside. Hopefully you did as well. So, for bedtime stories, up until now, I've just been doing short stories and, little kind of 15 or 20 minute stories. I thought I'd try something a little bit different tonight. We'll see how it goes, but I wanted to read the first few chapters from a book called The Curse of the Maya. Now, this is actually by one of my good friends, John O. Pierce. He is a British, don't hold that against him, British philosopher and teacher, author and writer. And he and one of his co-teachers, Andy Lonergan, put this book out last year for kind of general audience, but also to help teach kids that you can have fun reading while also learning some things about philosophy and archaeology. And so there you go. So I'm going to read the description from the back first, and then we'll get into the story. So, the gripping tale of twin 12-year-olds, Verity and Ethan, who travel to Guatemala with their father in a tale of archaeological intrigue. While excavating a newly found Maya city, an ancient mask is discovered. Is the mask the cause of the end of the Mayan civilization, or something else going on? So, fun story. I hope you'll enjoy. Like I said, I'm going to read a couple chapters tonight. Should be fun. Let Jono and I know what you think there in the comments. So, the prologue. The jungle night was silent. Well, as silent as the jungles of Guatemala ever got, thought Carlos as he trudged around the empty camp. The buzz of cicadas and the almost inaudible squeak of bats hunting them were now so commonplace to him that Carlos barely even heard them. This was his fourth night out here on his own. Now that the ground crew had left, having cleared a substantial area of the jungle, ready for scientists, archaeologists, and who knows who else to arrive, he was alone. Carlos didn't mind spending time on his own, normally. He'd been an independent security guard for many years. Guatemala was not the safest of places for foreigners. Many of his jobs were along similar lines, keeping people, or in this case places, safe before the main event began, whatever that might be. A vague job description for sure, but Carlos liked it this way. He liked not knowing where the next job may entail. Normally. This job was different. The beam of Carlos's flashlight cut through the darkness of the humid night air, revealing the sight around him. Tents, boxes of equipment, and caches of food that he'd been forbidden to touch. Sights that were very familiar to him. He turned to his right. The blade of light faltered as he turned, failing to illuminate the imposing, roughly hewn stone steps of the recently discovered temple that towered over him. He knew it was because of the distance between himself and the monument, but Carlos couldn't help but think the temple wanted to remain in the darkness, and was somehow overpowering his attempts to see it more clearly. "Esto loco," he thought, just craziness. But the thought would not leave him. On his previous nights, Carlos had stayed in the camp, but tonight he would not allow silly fears about ancient temples to defeat him. He took a number of strides toward the crumbling stonework, his determination evaporating as the light of his torch rested on a set of glyphs clearly depicting an ancient human sacrifice. Well, perhaps tomorrow, he thought to himself. Just as he turned to walk back to the pile of Hessian sacks he had formed into a sort of a chair, a light flickered at the top of the temple stairs. Impossible. There was nobody else out here. If there was, he would have heard them coming from miles away, as the only way in and out was either by helicopter or by four-wheel drive jeep. But there it was again, definitely. A light. An uninvited, unannounced visitor to the camp, to the temple? Carlos knew he had no choice but to investigate. After all, that was why he was here. With one hand on the butt of his pistol, he headed up the rocky steps. The entrance to the temple met him at the top. It was not particularly grand, simply a large rectangular hole in otherwise unbroken walls of the square room set at the top of the stone pyramid. Carlos tried to pierce the deep black of the ancient building with his flashlight, but once again, the darkness seemed to be impenetrable. And yet, from somewhere within, the light flashed again. This time, red. Without thinking, Carlos stepped into the dark, almost expecting it to weigh down around him, to surround him, to consume him. But nothing of the sort happened, and he let out a long breath. He hadn't even realized he'd been holding his breath. Then, to his left, the light pulsed again. Carlos felt for the video capture device attached to his cargo pockets and fumbled about, finally switching it on. He couldn't be too careful. "Hola?" he called into the tunnel-like corridor that ran downwards from the entrance chamber. Nothing. Not even an echo. The light pulsed again, and Carlos felt a strange pull. He longed to turn and run, but the red light burned once more, and he felt his feet begin to shuffle down the cramped passageway. Black, then red. Black, then red. All other details forgotten. Carlos was drawn forward by the mesmerizing throb. Around how many corners, down how many passageways he went, he didn't know, but the light grew stronger and stronger. Finally, he emerged into a vaulted chamber, deep in the heart of the temple. Just as he was about to curse his curiosity, his impetuousness, the red light burst into existence once again, though this time he could see what he thought was the source. There, in the middle of the room, was a podium, on top of which was an object unlike anything he'd ever seen. He knew it was ancient, hundreds, maybe thousands of years old. A shiver ran down his spine. Was he the first to see this for a millennium? How was it creating that light? Why now, at this time, after all these years? He took a step towards the podium. Black. He took another. Red. Black. Red. Black. The light became too powerful, the changes too rapid. He shut his eyes tightly, but there was no escape. Sudden pain, like a spear, shot through the center of his forehead. He covered his eyes with his hands, but the strobing light stretched for and found every crack. He felt a trickle of blood on his upper lip and traced it to his nostrils. Something was wrong, very wrong. Something gave way in Carlos's brain, incapable of making sense of the barrage of light. His hand, smeared with his own blood, stretched towards the podium, to the strange object that sat atop it. Centimeters, millimeters from the artifact, Carlos slumped backwards. Red, black, red, black, red, black. Chapter 1. Verity. V, where's your passport? Have you found it yet? Her father's voice had a ring of frustration to it, like he wanted to be out the door in the next 10 minutes. He needs to learn to relax, she thought. They had a good hour. V, did you hear me? Her name was Verity, but everyone called her V. Verity didn't roll off the tongue easily, but she liked the name. It meant truth, and Verity had taken her name as a lifelong mission in everything she did. Life was like a puzzle, and she was there to solve it. She could complete Sudoku puzzles quicker than her father. It relished a good detective book, a real whodunit mystery story. Right now, the problem to solve was the whereabouts of her passport. So far, the solution had eluded her. The truth of the matter was, she didn't have a clue as to where it was. As a result of this conundrum, her bedroom was in a complete state, like a tornado had whipped through it with no concern for anything but causing havoc. The clock was ticking. Her family had to get to London Heathrow Airport to catch a plane to Central America. This was the first time, now that Mom was gone, that they'd accompanied Dad on one of his trips. Ethan said they were boring trips, but he was a boy, so what would he know? Being the sibling who read books, Verity felt she knew more than Ethan. A lot more. Verity's bedroom door opened. "Hey, V, Dad's getting pretty irate. Have you found it yet? Why have you even got it? It should be in the drawer with the others. You always have to do things differently." Brothers were bad at the best of times. But twin brothers, they were worse than bad. They were detestable. "Okay, Ethan, keep your hair on. I suppose you're ready?" "Yes, I've been waiting downstairs for 10 minutes. We are completely ready," replied Ethan. Twins are funny things. Sometimes they love each other and are inseparable. Other times they hate each other and can't stand spending time in close proximity. Then there are those occasions when twins can love and hate each other in equal measure. They can wind each other up until they explode, but also depend on each other in ways that other siblings of different ages very rarely do. Verity and Ethan were that sort of twins. Right now, she hated him. Not real hate, of course, but brotherly and sisterly hate that comes when you see the other one giving you a smarmy grin, like a teacher's pet. Ethan swept his hand through his dark brown hair and shifted to his side. "Oh, look, V, here it is," he said as he pulled the passport from under a pair of dirty jeans on the dresser. "That was never there. You had it, didn't you? You little—" "V, for goodness sakes, girl, come on," came Dad's voice thundering from downstairs. "Some weasel just found it for me," she shouted back, before snatching the passport from Ethan's hands and storming out of the room. She liked puzzles, but she hated tricks. Tricks were what people were able to do when they weren't being truthful. Ethan was good at that. At tricks and not being truthful. Dad was waiting for them downstairs, his tall, thin frame leaning against the front door, tense and tired already. "All right, your bags are packed in the car, everything in the house is turned off, and the airport is waiting for us," he said, running his hand through his sandy-colored hair. Sometimes he really reminded Verity of Ethan. Well, no, sometimes Ethan really reminded her of Dad. Her dad was a very careful man who didn't like to take risks. "Plug sockets can cause fire," he always said if they were going away for anything longer than a weekend, before turning each and every one of them off. The house became a dead zone where all living technology was put briefly on hold. Frozen in time, to be resurrected upon their return. Parts of Verity, like her father, were careful. Her thinking about puzzles, her homework, when she was making things in Dad's shed. Parts of her weren't careful. These were mainly the parts responsible for cleaning her room. After a last check around the house, Dad liked to check again just after a good check, and then once more just to make sure. The three of them piled into the car to set off to the airport. Their destination? Guatemala, a country squashed snugly between Mexico, Belize, Honduras, El Salvador, and the sea. The trip was going to be exotic. It was going to be surprising. But most of all, unbeknownst to the twins and their father, it was going to be very dangerous indeed. Verity, though, was not aware of this. She was excited. She loved airports, at least the few she'd been to. There was so much opportunity to people watch, guessing where they might be going and why. There were people everywhere. Families, groups, people on their own, couples in love, couples out of love, children, workers, holiday makers, businessmen and women, the old and the young. Airports were feast for her eyes. They delighted her. Chapter 2. Ants scuttled around on their never-ending errands, almost bumping into each other, yet keeping to their swift journeys from here to there, arranging themselves in a single-file columns with occasional bursts of speed around the edges in attempts to overtake slower movers. Some stopped, drawn in by lights, or shelves covered in attractive goods, or departure screens, or the realization that one of their children was missing. Most, however, had places to be, causing flowing rivers of movement, cascades of motion at all levels of the large building. The departure hall was like two river deltas moving in opposite directions, crashing into each other. Except there was no crashing. All of these people, on all their different journeys, had, without thought, arranged themselves into an efficient network of flowing bodies and minds, so that it was as the hall itself had come alive, its veins and arteries ebbing and surging in constant flux. Ethan hated airports. Here they were in the huge departure lounge, in its flowing busyness, and all there was to do was shop, and shopping was boring. There were no games to play, and by games, ideally what Ethan wanted was football, rugby, or cricket. The things he loved school for, and karate on the weekends. But here, all he could do was wish he had his handheld games console, but Dad hadn't let him bring it. What was the point of going on holiday if you couldn't take things like that, he thought. He had read his football magazine already, and Verity didn't want to play Uno. With a giant harumph, Ethan stood up and announced, "I'm going to that shop over there." V was reading a book, and Dad was reading a science magazine. Both were being as fun as watching paint dry. "Don't wander too far," said Dad without even looking up from his reading. Ethan sauntered across a busy walkway, stopping in the middle because he could. Ethan loved damming channels at a beach he used to visit on the Isle of Wight that had a small river running down through the sands. He would block channels with sand and stones, small rocks, and bits of driftwood. Now, himself an unmoving boulder in these currents, Ethan stood stock still and took in the motion around him. After a minute of affecting all those around him, he moved on and went into a shop, one that sold a whole range of things that people might want to bring on their holidays. After 10 minutes of absently-minded scanning a whole range of different items, something caught his eye and stroked the fires of adventure in him. After all, the only fiction books he did read were spy books. He would surely put these to good use in Guatemala. "You spent how much?" "Well, that's all your pocket money for the first 2 days gone," Dad said in an irritated voice upon Ethan's return. No one seemed quite as excited about his binocular and compass survival set as Ethan was. Oh well, their loss. Ethan proceeded to spend the next 20 minutes of mindless waiting, staring at random people through his binoculars. This included Verity at very close range, scaring her as she looked up from her book to be confronted with the two massive, shiny alien eyes of his new purchase. "These will be useful in Guatemala, when we're in the jungle, looking out from that new temple they found," Ethan said excitedly to his sister. "Shh, you know we're not supposed to talk about it. They're keeping it secret while the experts look at everything. They don't want the press and the TV stations getting all excited and ruining the site before they've done all the proper work." "Calm down, V. You're so uptight sometimes. Look, maybe we'll be able to sing orangutans with these," Ethan replied. Verity looked up from her book and right down the other end of his binoculars, into her brother's eyes. "Orangutans live in Borneo, in Asia, Ethan. On the other side of the world, we're more likely to see spider monkeys. Fingers crossed, we'll even encounter an ocelot. Or maybe, if we're really lucky, you'll be eaten by a jaguar." She raised her eyebrows and gave him a sideways glance. "This is why you need to read more books." "Geek," said Ethan. After looking up at the monitor above their heads, their father interrupted the testy twins. "Right, kids, we're going to be boarding soon. Make sure you've got everything. This includes your passport, V." "Ha ha, Dad, very funny," she sarcastically replied. Dad began collecting his own belongings together before turning back to the children suddenly, as if only just registering the twins' conversation. "V's right, though, Ethan. We shouldn't go shouting about this temple. It's quite the find, and the world's press will go mad for a story like this. The British Museum knows, and they're very excited, which is why they have to let me go and help. They're even paying for me. I expect they'll want an exhibition in return. I've always had expertise in Mesoamerican history." "That's the area around Mexico, Guatemala, and El Salvador, Ethan. You know, between North and South America," Verity interjected, with her own smarmy, knowing smile. Yeah, I knew that. Thank you very much, Mrs. Hume. We're not at school now. Teach. Of course, Ethan didn't know that, or if he had once, he had since forgotten it. He only held on to useful information, like football formations his favorite team used, or who had transferred to where and for how much money, or how to get to level 9 on the latest computer game, Trail of Oblivion. Anyway, I want to know if there's going to be another Mayan prophecy about the end of the world. The Mayans sound cool. Verity looked at Ethan in the way that made him feel like he was about to be corrected. He was going to be taught something. He hated that look. Actually, and he hated it when Verity started her sentences with actually. People often make the mistake of using Mayan as an objective to describe things to do with the Maya, or to name the Maya themselves. But you should only really use the term Mayan to refer to the language. All other times it's best to use the term Maya. OMG, hashtag no one cares V, you're so dull, Ethan reacted. Oh, so I'm a loser for knowing things? That's really childish, Ethan, even for you. I know something, V. I know that you're a completely awesome sister, thanks, Ethan. Verity gave her brother a look. Children, I'm not putting up with this for the whole journey. Cut it out. Their father had spoken, but how much good it would do was another question. The 3 travelers were soon seated on the aircraft, buckled in with excitement growing. The 2 children hijacking their father's 3 weeks of work for a holiday of their own. No one could look after them for that final week before the beginning of summer holidays, so he had received special permission to take them with him. He had been hoping that they wouldn't get in his way, as he had often reminded them over the last few weeks. However, they would end up doing far more than get in his way. Far more. All right, so that's the prologue and the first 2 chapters of The Curse of the Maya by Johnny Pierce and Andy Lonergan. Hope you enjoyed. Let me know what you think. And enjoy the rest of your evening. If you got any special requests for bedtime stories, just let me know. Thanks, everybody.